Robert Frost said, if you work 8 hours a day diligently long enough, you'll eventually get to be the boss and be able to work 12 hours a day. And that's pretty much what emergency medicine leadership is all about. So I looked at some sources of leadership information, and actually I'm missing one slide here. Let's see if it's back there. Nope. It's a quote from Sun Tzu from the Tao Te Ching, which was written in the 6th century before the Christian era. And the quote is, "The worst leader is he who is despised. A good leader is he who people worship. And a great leader is he who people say, we did it ourselves." When I first read that, I thought, aha, that's where Obama got leading from behind. But then after further reflection, I could see, no, really what Sun Tzu means is that you lead very inconspicuously, by example, by supporting your team members, and by giving credit to others rather than to yourself. Sun Tzu is also the guy who said a journey of 1,000 miles begins with but a single step, which is a pretty powerful quotation as well. So if you could read just one leadership book, the one I would recommend is Fred Kaufman's Conscious Business. Fred was an MIT professor of engineering and is now full-time in the consulting business. But this book, for me, I spent 45 years trying to teach myself how to be a leader. This book touches on every aspect of information that's been useful to me over 45 years, so I really strongly recommend it. Some of the quotes from the book I think resonate with what we've been talking about. I won't read them. But the last one from John Buchan, the task of leadership is not to put greatness into people, but to elicit it, for the greatness is already there. Remember we talked about hire fire and how that didn't work, but inspiration is really what your job is. And I've learned that that is absolutely the truth, that there is value in every single employee, and it's your job as a leader to figure out how to help them express that. Oh, there's my slide. Just out of order a little bit. Okay. Stephen Covey, of course, wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. He also wrote a book called The 8th Habit. And the 8th habit is finding your voice and helping those around you find their voice to realize their potential. And if you read the introduction, there's a section in the introduction that talks about the mastery of life resides in the gap between stimulus and response. And I think that's the mastery of leadership as well. He talks about people who are overachievers, which I suspect there's a few in this room, that their gap to start out with is measured in microns. It's stimulus, boom, is how it works. And that doesn't work for a leader. So your job as a leader is to learn how to widen the gap, which means what you're looking for is to give yourself the time to decide what response to that stimulus is most likely to forward me toward the goal I'm trying to achieve. And for me, that's been one of the hardest lessons there is to learn. But I recommend both books. I think they're extremely valuable. Okay, so if I had to pick 6, the ones that I have to start with is get to know yourself, learn how to be conscious of your own limitations and hot buttons, and how to compensate for them. Dysfunctional people are very good at figuring out what your hot buttons are, and unless you're aware of them, you're liable to get significantly manipulated in trying to manage people. Take care of your behavior, because the leader's behavior it reflects the culture of the organization. And some people react negatively to the word culture. All it means is how we do things around here. And what we're trying to pass on to each new person that joins the group is how we do things around here and what the culture is. If you looked at the subtitle on Conscious Business, it's Building Value Through Values. And values are really what determines your culture. We talked about the autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And purpose is essentially the values that your organization is going to uphold in the process of moving from its current position to achieving its vision as it improves. And actions always trump words. So what you do is much more important than what you say. My advice is to listen to yourself about who is talking, how much is talking. If you're doing most of the talking, you're probably not being effective as a leader. And in order to be an effective leader, I think you need to constantly solicit feedback from the people around you. It's painful, to hear it. Let them give it anonymously if they feel they must. But I think that's the only way that you learn how you're perceived by others and then have the opportunity to put the fix in. We were talking to somebody at dinner last night about one of the dilemmas of being a medical leader is in every organization, gossip is poisonous. It absolutely kills the organization. And somebody was talking about the slow doctor being on. If that problem doesn't get dealt with, what happens? The nurses start talking about, oh God, Ron's on today. I don't know if I can face that. So if the conversations are not brought to the surface, they go underground in the form of gossip. The dilemma for an emergency medicine leader is one of the only ways you can find out what goes on when you're not there is through the nursing staff and other people. So you're constantly trying to balance this relationship between appropriate requests for information and slipping into the gossip area. So remember I talked yesterday about teaching communication skills, and one of the communication skills is how you help people deal with those interpersonal reactions. Ideally, they should be talking to each other, but nurses frequently are uncomfortable approaching doctors. So your job is to create an environment that's safe where the nurse doesn't feel like it's inappropriate to question the physician. Okay, so second one would be begin with the end in mind. Yogi Berra said, if you don't know where you're going, you're likely to end up someplace else. And it's amazing to me how many organizations, be it physician groups or hospital emergency departments, never take the time to sit down and ask the question, what are we all about? This is the second of Stephen Covey's 7 habits, is begin with the end in mind. And you can't really hold people accountable to achieving a vision that they've had no part in creating. So part of the vision, mission, value exercise is really to involve everybody in the department, all the way down to the registrar and the housekeeping staff, if you can possibly get them. And you oftentimes use an outside facilitator so that it doesn't appear that leadership is dominating the discussion. So many hospitals, the C-suite meets, they create a vision for the hospital, they put it in a real fancy frame and they hang it up in the hall, and then it just draws dust. That's all that happens. In my opinion, a vision mission statement is valueless unless it's embraced by the people on the front line actually doing the work, which is you and your department. So I think every department, every product line, if you will, should have its own mission, vision, value statement. And those usually get distilled down into just a vision statement. So I recommend that you then conduct an annual review of that. And what you'll find is in the course of the year, some problems have come up that your vision statement doesn't address, or the marketplace will have changed and you need to modify what your priorities are. This is also the time that the board of directors can think about setting those targeted results that we talked about in leadership compensation. So I already said that. And then you have to make the organization's vision live. And this is a hard job. You got to work hard at this. But what we would typically do in our group is it would be printed on the back of every agenda for every meeting. And we would start the meeting by having each person read a line in the vision statement. So it's clear the reason we're having this meeting, what this meeting is all about, is that we're committed to this vision and these values. And so you keep it first and foremost. In the process of counseling people, I think your job as a leader is to help people be successful. And so you do that in the context of the vision. Your behavior is detracting from our ability to achieve the vision in the following ways. And we need to change it because this is what we're committed to. It's also important that when you get new people in the organization that you really do have a formal orientation and make this a key part of it so that they come to own it as well. And then you want to celebrate even the smallest successes. Believe it or not, and, you know, most of us physicians are pretty much glass half empty kind of folks. We can see the problems, boom, very easily, but we tend to overlook the successes. And your employees, the people that work for you, or don't work for you, one of the challenges of emergency medicine leadership is most of the people you lead don't work for you. I used to think, well, if I just wrote their paycheck, by gosh, they'd do what I want them to do. But I had an organization where that was true, and it still didn't happen. It's actually your personality and your ability to create that vision and inspire people to want to achieve it, the purpose in that Dan Pink presentation that makes all the difference. And we had Best Exemplify Awards where you had a wooden plaque with brass plates on it that I think the way it worked is the nursing staff would nominate 3 people, and then the physicians would select the one who most exemplifies for the quarter, and their name would be on a plaque. Celebrate the small events, particularly the ones that evidence personal growth, and I'm sure everybody's aware that you celebrate and praise in public and criticize and counsel in private. The fourth one is important, I think, in that what's missing in so many organizations is accountability. And you need a system that assures accountability for you to be able to do your job. One of the other things I kind of learned from Edison and Ford, didn't really finish the story, but anyway, Ford left Edison after 8 years to, of course, start his motor company. But while he was there, you remember that Edison created all of his inventions based on DC power. And DC power, that's the negative of it, is it can't be transmitted very far. So every so often you had to have a new dynamo, you know, to replenish the power. And part of Ford's learning about an assembly line was based on duplicating these dynamos in exactly the same way so that the people who took care of them knew exactly what dial was. Nikola Tesla, on the other hand, who we hear a lot about now about Tesla cars, came up with alternating current, which can be transmitted over long distances without repeat replenishment. And those of you who try to manage multiple facilities, what you'll find is that you can't be there. So you have to come up with a system that duplicates how you would handle it if you were there, and to have a unique set of communication terminology, I think is helpful. What we used was something that's in the book called Messages, but the book has a whole variety of different communication conventions. It doesn't matter really too much which one you pick, but you just need to pick one and use it. And what we used was requests, promises, and by-whens. So the request would be, John, I need a copy of the Charge Master by Friday at 5 o'clock. Are you willing to do that? And people have to be able to say no in order to say yes with enthusiasm. So there were 4 responses to that request. Yes, no, I need more information, or I have to ask my wife. was the fourth one, or my spouse. So if people accept the request, then they make a promise that by 5 o'clock on Friday they'll deliver that. And you record that in writing so that everybody in the group can see that. And you set by 5 o'clock Friday is the by when. What happens in an organization if Friday 5 o'clock comes and goes and you don't have a copy of the charge master? What's your conversation as a leader? Oh, well, that John, you just can't depend on him. If you want something done, you got to do it yourself. All kinds of negative stuff comes up. So one of the other rules in your communication convention is that you don't miss a deadline without renegotiating the by when. So the person could call at 4 o'clock on Friday and say, something's come up, I'm not going to have it for you, but I'll have it by Monday. Though it's very subtle, what this does is it builds a muscle in your organization of trust. That if you ask for something, they agree to deliver it, and a by when, you can depend on that to happen. And people know that if they don't deliver, there's a consequence, which is the public disapproval. So strongly recommend some kind of a unique communication convention that assures accountability. And we already said shared accountability never works, because when it doesn't happen, this is what happens. It was the other guy's fault. So it has to be one person, one task. And then the basic unit, I think, of group governance and improvement is the project. The Director's Academy, the fourth phase, the last phase, is that the individual has to create a project, build a team, complete the project, and write a project report. I've written a short primer on project management that each of the candidates gets. If you're interested in having a copy of that, just email me and I'll send it to you. But you want everybody in your organization to participate in project teams, and eventually to learn how to lead the project team, because that's how you're going to get things done. And you want to create a culture that encourages everybody to. One of my partners used to say that content grinds up context, or context grinds up content. And what he meant by that is, over time, if your culture is one of accountability, those people who don't want to be held accountable or don't want to participate in these things will deselect themselves out of the organization. And those people who resonate with being accountable and accomplishing things will adhere to the organization. 5, don't procrastinate on hard decisions. This is a real issue between the medical leader, the physician leader, and the nurse leader. Periodically, you've both got problems with the other person's employee or associate, and agreeing as to when something needs to be done about that is better done sooner than later. In my experience, I can't recall an instance where delaying anything ever got better. It always got worse. So it's better to step up and address it in advance. And that means that you have to be certain that you are transmitting the proper information, so that you don't go, well, let's see, you didn't do that. Maybe I didn't ask it right. Maybe I wasn't clear about what I wanted. So a key part of managing that is setting clear terms of satisfaction. You know, we will have 0 tolerance for lateness. You're late one more time, you're terminated. Here it's in writing, like you to sign that. And so you let them know that there's a specific consequence for that behavior. Then you're clear about what the terms of satisfaction are, the individual's clear, and the consequences there, and the individual can make a choice, whether they want to play or don't. Delay costs credibility all around. We talked about the older partner and not being able to get him moved along, or her. That is a key instance of delay costing credibility. And then lastly, everybody from Eisenhower on down has said that the key to being an excellent leader is that you should consider all failures to be yours and all successes those of somebody on your team. It may not always technically be true, but it's the most powerful way to look. In Covey's 8th Habit, he talks about 5 cancerous behaviors, and those cancerous behaviors start with blaming. And usually when something doesn't happen in the organization, our first reaction, if we haven't worked on our gap, is to look for who's to blame. And that's a very disempowering approach to it. What I try to do is say when something fails, how did I fail to delegate appropriately, to support the individual, to spot the fact they were going through a divorce and needed some special consideration or whatever the issue was. I took it to be my problem first and theirs second. And that's very powerful in an organization, builds a lot of trust. And so we get back full circle to a great leader makes people say we did it ourselves. And that's all I have to say about that.